Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dev.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Modus Cafe. I'm your host, Mercedes, and this is just a solo episode. It's just me, and I'm going to be talking about my elbow injury that I got in May 2022. And, it was a really big struggle the last almost 2 years. And yeah, I really want to share that side because there are a lot of things that I did that really helped me on the mental side, as well as recovering from this injury. It's an injury that has been the longest ever to recover from. And I also want to talk about how I have managed to shift my identity as a professional athlete to now being a coach and trying to be as athletic as possible, being 41 and having so many injuries under my belt. And if you didn't know, I used to be a professional tennis player, and then I went on to become a professional climber. I competed in both tennis and climbing. Being an athlete has been what I'm used to most of my life. And when injuries come up that tend to give you a sign that things are going to shift, it can really change your mentality and even just change your identity. So I would say that the last 2 years have been a pretty big struggle, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. So with being a professional athlete, I'm no stranger to rehab. I'm no stranger to injuries. I've had so many injuries. I've had multiple orthopedic injuries and surgeries. So I've had a shoulder surgery. I've had 2 ACL repairs, and I've basically injured everything else I can think of. And the rehab process has actually been really good for all of those injuries. For the most part, after every injury, I've been able to come back to whatever sport with a better mental attitude, being physically more prepared for what's about to happen. And I've just become smarter in how I train. And so in May 2022, I would say that this is the hardest I've ever climbed in my life. My technique was really great. My capacity was the best it ever was. That is probably my biggest weakness as a climber, is my capacity to be able to do hard things over and over again. Going bouldering for a whole day and being able to climb hard all day was never really a possibility for me. I would get tired pretty quickly, but I could climb hard for a very short amount of time. And so, yeah, May 2022 was probably the best that I've ever performed. And that's about the time that I got injured. And so what was coming up for me, I want to explain a little bit about what the injury was, so that if any of these things come up for you, you can maybe take a mental note and go see a PT. And that's the first piece of advice I would give anyone, is if you are injured for a week or two and it's not getting any better or it's getting worse, go see a PT immediately. You don't have to commit to doing PT sessions, but at least get one consultation to understand what's happening and maybe why it started to happen. A lot of people tend to put it off going to see a PT, and then the injury gets worse, and maybe now the recovery time is so much longer. And this is basically what happened to me. It wasn't that I resisted going to see a PT, but I had similar elbow pain in the past. The pain that I was experiencing was basically elbow tendonitis. And I would say it's more of like the climber's elbow, where it was the front of that bicep into the joint. So I didn't necessarily have tennis elbow or golfer's elbow. It was more the middle of the elbow and would hurt on full extension of the arm and when I fully flexed the arm. So I had gone through this rehab before. I was like, no problem. It's going to take a couple months, but I know how to deal with this. And I dug up some of the old exercises that I was doing, and just started doing those. I drastically reduced the volume of my climbing, and I kept to very, very easy climbing just to keep movement in my body. And I went to basically jugs, and that was it. I stayed away from anything else that would hurt my elbow. And the problem was that actually it wasn't getting any better. It was actually getting worse with the tendonitis rehab that I was doing. I was getting really frustrated. I was doing everything that I did in the past, and it was just getting worse. So in August of 2022, I went and saw Erin Eaton from Movement here in Seattle. Which, by the way, I want to give a huge shout out to those folks. Movement, they have been a really great partner for me, like me personally, through all of the injuries that I've had to deal with, as well as a lot of my clients they've taken care of. They work with a lot of climbers. So if you're in Seattle, or even if you're in the US, you can still get a remote consultation from them. So that's movemend.info. So you can go check them out. And so yeah, in August, I called up Erin and I was like, hey, I really need to talk to you. So we did an in-person consult so that she could test, like physically test where my strength was. And really, she didn't really need to do any of that. She just had me stick my arm out, and all she did was poke around. And she asked if I had basically a zinging feeling um, in in my bicep, and she didn't have to press very hard at all, but she just like tapped lightly on the side of my bicep, and it shot pain all the way down my arm. And she's like, okay, yeah, this is unfortunately a nerve injury. Like, I'm not going to say that if other people have that same sensation that you have a nerve injury, definitely again go see a a PT for that. She has her own process and is going to determine what the cause of an injury is. But with me, she said it was very clear that this was a nerve injury and possibly due to tendonitis. So the problem was that the tendonitis wasn't very specific. It wasn't like, oh yeah, you have climber's elbow or you have golfer's elbow. I actually had tendonitis of the brachialis, which could be climber's elbow, but I also had tendonitis of the pronator. And that pronator was so, toned or like constantly on alert that it was pressing down on my nerve that ran down. And it was actually the medial nerve, which affects the thumb, the index finger, and the middle finger, and the base of the ring finger. And I was actually getting pain at the base of my ring finger before I started getting this elbow pain. So that was really interesting for me to hear. And so with these nerve injuries, you actually have to dial things back a lot. So I ended up not being able to do anything until the sensation and the sensitivity of my nerve went down. And really what was happening is that the nerve was just very inflamed and sensitive to almost everything that I did. It was really hard to hold a glass of water. Even sometimes brushing my teeth would hurt because the pronator, it rotates your forearm. So, basic things hurt, and it hurt for a very long time. So I basically had to stop doing my regular workouts. Things that didn't hurt it were like overhead pressing, as long as I kept it in a certain range of motion. I couldn't climb. Even just doing easy jug climbing, that was out for me, unfortunately. So, I did everything I could at that point. But Erin was there to make sure I was staying on track. And, the first 3 months was very, very slow. The goal of those first couple months was basically to recondition the nerve, to function the way that it should, and to basically feel normal when doing regular activity. And so this is retraining the pain receptors, but also, the nerve has to physically repair as well. And nerves just take a lot longer than tendons. Okay, so that took a couple months, and then I started to notice that I was getting a lot of pain in my shoulder. And so I went back to Movement and worked with Sam. And he's wonderful at working with shoulders. And yeah, it had a little bit to do with what was going on in the elbow. And it was just a lot of weakness. So he got me to do overhead press, a lot of overhead press, because one, it didn't hurt my elbow when I did it. And I basically just had to retrain what was happening on that right side. When you decrease your activity, other things are going to start coming up. And so this cascade effect started to happen. So I had the shoulder issue as I was working through the elbow. And then, so that was in October when I went and saw Sam about my shoulder. And another couple months went by and really nothing had changed, in my nerve. And it was just like meeting with Erin, her telling me it was going to be okay, and just to keep going. And yeah, at that point, it was starting to get better. Starting in 2023, there was more things that I could do, but not everything. And at this point, I was like, whoa, this injury is taking a lot longer than I expected. I'm not really sure what that means for me. I think that, it's since May, I haven't been able to climb hard. So that's like 7 to 8 months of not really climbing hard at all. And I was really starting to lose my mind a little bit. And at this point, it was a lot of my identity starting to suffer. If I didn't climb hard, I had no business training climbers. If I wasn't a good climber, what else am I going to do? And movement was also a big part of who I am as a human. And movement means, I did a lot of handstands, cartwheels, locomotion training. It's basically a form of martial art and dance put together. And I couldn't do any of that either because I couldn't actually put weight in a plank position on my elbow. Strange. Some things, it's really interesting. Some of the exercises that I could do and some exercises that I couldn't. And even just not having the ability to do movement training, to me, like being able to move the way that I want, really, like I started to question my existence, like whether, this was even worth it. So, at this point I was like, okay, what else can I do with my life that's physical? And I had a list of exercises that I could do pain-free. And I decided, okay, I'm going to just try to work on putting on more muscle mass. And, this is also part of my philosophy as a woman. And, I was like 39, turning 40, like, okay, it's really important that I maintain or increase my muscle mass as I'm getting older. I'm like, okay, I'm going to experiment with some bodybuilding techniques. Let's see how that goes. But because of everything, like my overall movement, like the amount of output, the amount of movement I was doing every day was so much lower. And so I started to gain some weight. And it was really hard to control or adjust what I was eating. I actually traveled quite a bit in the end of 2022 and in 2023. And when you travel, the best way for me, how I like to experience culture, when you're going to different countries, is to eat their food. And so, that was really hard. It was really hard for me. So I kind of, my body started to change with some gained weight, as well as doing some of these bodybuilding exercises. But it was cool. Like I'm still currently I'm in a calorie deficit. I'm back to trying to just lose some of that extra weight while trying to maintain my muscle mass. I can talk about that at a different point. But going through the bodybuilding protocols was really interesting. Not the kind of training I like to do. It's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of volume. But it got me through. I wasn't able to do as much cardio because my knees, as I said, I've had 2 ACL repairs, and my knees get really sensitive as well, depending on what it is that I was doing. And, like wearing a pack and hiking, or even just going like uphill, wearing a small pack was actually hurting my shoulder and my neck. And so I wasn't doing much of that. And so what I ended up doing was biking, and that biking kind of just like hurt my knees even more. So all of these things started to create like this cycle of being somewhat healthy, doing something maybe too much, getting slightly hurt and injured, and then that cycle starts again. And I had never really experienced the cycle to this extent ever. Okay, so I'm doing these bodybuilding protocols, and I still notice that my shoulder hurts from time to time. My elbow was still hurting. I hadn't really started climbing yet. I would climb once in a while, I'd go to the gym, do some easy climbing, especially if I'm working with clients. I really like to be involved in their process. And so I will climb with them. But I wasn't, I would say, doing anything strenuous. It was just enough to load my elbow. I would say at the end of every session, my elbow was kind of talking to me a little bit. Um, but the way that I would continue to measure my elbow was with just like bicep curls, with pull-up positions, and if those were hurting, it meant that I wasn't really quite ready to climb yet. um, climb at a harder grade. So I would climb maybe once a week, easy stuff, not a lot of volume. And then the rest of my time was lifting in exercises that didn't hurt at all. So I did manage to put on a decent amount of muscle mass, which was cool. Um, but because things were still hurting, I had to figure out that there must be something else going on, because like my elbows still hurt, my shoulders still hurt, sometimes my neck would hurt, and this was all on the same side. And so in December, I went and saw a different PT at Movement who basically did like a nerve analysis from my neck. And I told him, in the past, during my heaviest training phases, I would notice a weakness in my hand, especially in my right hand. Something that shouldn't necessarily be happening. I just thought, maybe, you know what, maybe my finger strength just sometimes just kind of sucks, and that can happen. But this would happen frequently in the past. And I'm curious whether that has something to do with what's going on. And so he did a nerve test, and basically, like, what we believe, it could still be wrong, but that a lot of my nerve issues are coming from my neck, especially the base of my cervical spine, which is like the bottom of the neck. And that if I bent my neck in a certain way with my arm overhead, that I lost a significant amount of strength in my fingers. So that was a huge, moment for me of like, okay, oh, I'm not, like, my fingers aren't actually weak, because like if I test my finger strength, I have wonderful finger strength. I don't really necessarily have to train finger strength, but I would feel weak from time to time. And now it made so much sense. And he also said, this was Dr. Tanner, he also said that, it could be affecting what's happening in my shoulder, and of course what's happening in my elbow. And so it was very simple, some of the things that I was doing with my neck. A lot of like specific positions, and this stuff was not new. I had gone to Union PT, which is also, like, shout out to them. They have always been really great with treating a lot of my shoulder issues. And some of the PTs there would give me neck exercises, but we didn't know that this is kind of like a chronic issue for me. And so now I know this is a chronic issue. And so the neck component of my rehab is now something that I work on every week. And at that time, so that was in December 2023. At that point, I would say it was a huge turning point for me coming back into climbing regularly, that I was able to identify the root cause of what was going on. So yeah, that's basically the start of my diagnosis. Was in May 2022 all the way through December 2023. So it took a while to really figure out what was going on. It doesn't mean that my nerve wasn't damaged. Like, I still had to work through that nerve damage and work through all of that tendonitis that I had gained, through all of the training. And so from December to now, there has been a really big shift. So first, I do want to back up and just say, like, I did briefly mention that I had a really hard time with my mental side in 2023, just going through kind of basically an identity crisis, and gaining weight, and, not being able to move the way that I want to move. And I really had to change the way that I was thinking about things. And during the turning point of what was happening for me after December, I really just had to change how I was looking at everything. how I looked at myself as a coach, how I looked at myself as an athlete, and how I looked at life in general. And it was really lovely. And in December was also when I came together with our climbers at Modus for a climbing retreat in Joshua Tree. And, I had about 20 folks from our membership. We all came together to one of my favorite climbing destinations. And it was really like their stoke and their energy and their support and allowing them to see me in kind of this lowest state really ever. But they had no judgment toward me. In fact, it was only love and support from them. And even when I was climbing something, in quotation marks, easy, for them to be able to see some of my process and like failing on some of these things. And it just that experience of love and even just like joy helped me so much. These are things that I tend to preach as a climbing coach. It's like, don't let grades define you. Don't let it define your self-worth. And I've been able to do that a lot of my life, but this was the lowest part of my self-worth ever. And it was really difficult to come to reality. And it took a group of our amazing members to help me come to terms with that. And, like shout out to Katya. Katya was there a lot for me as well to help me kind of restructure my business to allow time for me to kind of overcome some of this. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to our members and Coach Katya for being there for the support, as well as helping me find my joy again for climbing. And that's really what what I had to do was figure out why I was climbing at this point. What is my big why? What brings me joy about climbing? And still a lot of it comes down to movement and how I interact with people and the culture that we've built, and interacting with the environment is really important to me. So none of those things, like how I can find joy in climbing, had anything to do with how hard that I could climb. And so this realization was profound for me. And I started writing all of these things down. And the first mental tool that I used was actually a gratitude journal. I had done gratitude journals in the past for different reasons. One, because I heard it was good. But I never used it as a tool to come out of depression. And I decided I would commit to doing gratitude journaling, or at least writing and journaling. And it started off with a lot of negative journaling. There would be some gratitude in there as well. But as I started to journal more and more, I focused more on the positives. In the beginning, it was a lot of swear words, a lot of things like that. Like I'm sure if someone read it now, they'd be like, what in the hell? This person is crazy. But that's journaling, it's for yourself. It's not for anyone else to read. And it was just to get everything out. And what was great is that as I started to make it more positive, and I would recognize when I wanted to write something negative, and I would stop that negative cycle, I would just say, you know what? Like, yes, that negativity lives there, but I've already processed it here. Just continue to focus on the positive. And so just like writing those positives down over and over and over again, that's actually helped me so much. Like I physically feel lighter after doing a lot of this gratitude journaling. So this is something I would say, if you're ever feeling really crummy about yourself or the situation, the way the political system is right now, like come back to yourself and just remember that things are actually pretty good, Okay, so gratitude journaling was definitely one of the major tools that helped me in overcoming some of this identity shifting and depression. But something else, so I wanted to share a couple other tactics that I used. So for each session, either if it was a climbing session or lifting or something else, I always made an intent. I didn't have to write this down. I kind of went in saying, as I'm warming up, like, okay, today I want to focus on XYZ. So some examples were, okay, today I want to work on my anti-style. My anti-style is slab. I am not the slab queen. I am horrible at it. But if I at least tried some slab, that was a win. If I was climbing, and because it was like a lot of easy stuff, I decided, okay, today's intention is to feel how my hamstrings engage and how my posterior chain engages on these moves. You know, these are small things that maybe it feels a little silly to do, but it got me connected with my body. It felt like a win when I was doing it. I'm like, oh yeah, like look how awesome I feel in these moves. Wow, I'm really able to engage and position my hips in this way so I can feel fully engaged. So these small intentions allowed me to find wins in my session. So at the end of my session, I would look for the wins. And that was really easy when you set an intention. So that actually helped me stay positive through my sessions, and I wouldn't have as many of these negative spirals. When I'm thinking about my self-worth or comparing myself to where I used to be. When I'm climbing, sometimes it's really hard for me to be like, man, like this used to be no problem, and now it feels really hard. And so when I put an intention and look for those wins, it's easier for me to separate from myself in comparing myself to my past self. uh, Another thing is that I tried to not dwell too much on what I sucked at. Okay, so again, it's going back to that gratitude journaling, but doing this in the moment. So this could be if I'm at the climbing gym or if I'm on my moonboard. If I noticed myself going and thinking about these things, about, man, I suck at, slopers, Gastons, I would try to stop myself and be like, you get to be climbing right now. You're actually pain free. All you got to do is continue to move and stay consistent. And remember, why is it that you're doing this? And this is a lot of mental work, but man, it has really helped me. So those are some of the mental tools that I use to kind of dig myself out of this depression cycle that I was feeling, and to help me shift my identity. And I wouldn't say that I have a new identity. I would say that my identity is still a work in progress. Okay, so I want to talk about my rehab process, because I think this is going to help. I'll just go over it really quickly. So pain is generally the indicator that you want to measure. It's what you want to work with, and that's what you want to work around. So a lot of what I was doing in the beginning, again, I couldn't do very much without hurting my elbow. And it was as simple as, I have my desk here. I could crimp the end of my desk very lightly until I was about to feel pain. And maybe I would back off a little bit, and I would hold for 20 seconds. And I would do this a couple times a day. Maybe I'd do 3 sets, 3 times a day. So that was one of the exercises. And I could measure just like, each pull, I could say, oh, I could crimp a little bit harder on the edge of that table. Another part was just holding a half a pound. I have these little weights that you can add to barbells, and they're half a pound. And I would hold the half a pound in my hand, and my elbow would be at 90 degrees. And it would be slightly painful, but I would try to hold that position for 20 to 30 seconds, do some nerve glides in between. And the nerve glides I still do them. Like I would do them a couple times a day, but you keep the reps really, really short. It's like maybe 3 to 6 repetitions. You maybe do that a couple times a day. Those are really easy to overdo. So if you ever do nerve glides, just, be aware they can upset the nerve even more if you have a nerve injury. So in between these like crimp pulls I would do on the table, I would do nerve glides. And yeah, I would do the bicep curl at 90 degrees. None of this was really concentric. I had some wrist exercises where I would do wrist rotations, because remember that pronator was where I was really getting a lot of that tendonitis. But it was like very light. Like I think I started holding just a pen in my hand and doing very slow rotations. And that was basically the extent of my rehab for the first month or two, and then just slowly increasing the intensity. And how you know if you're doing too much is if the pain would linger for more than a couple hours after the session. Ideally, you don't have any pain, but in order for tissue to change, you have to put stress on that tissue. And finding that middle ground is really difficult. So that pain indicator is what is telling you if you've done too much. And this was my measurement, even coming back into climbing. And my goal was to be able to climb and only have a couple hours of pain after the session. And if it was more than a couple hours, then I know that I had done too much. So a lot of my rehab still, I was still in quite a bit of pain, even when I was, climbing, coming back into climbing. So then, after the isometrics, for a couple months, I would do concentric stuff. So like doing bicep curls and then like assist with the lowering, or it would be the opposite, do the lowering part and assist with the lifting component. There was just a mixture of a lot of these exercises. I don't think that there is a magic protocol. It's just working with your pain and consistently increasing the load on your tissues. And talking with a PT is really important because then they can guide you and make sure like, okay, like that pain sounds good. Let's add this thing or let's swap out these things. So that's most of what my rehab looked like until much later when I was doing some hangboarding. But it would be following the same protocol. All right, so now let's talk about some of my climbing training as I'm coming back from rehab into transitioning into trying to climb harder. So again, I was doing a lot of easy climbing, and my goal was to set a timer for 20 minutes and climb as much as I could in those 20 minutes. Maybe I would do a couple sets of those sessions in my session. So it'd be like maybe 2 to 3 sets of 20 minutes. And each time I did that session, I would try to swap out one easy climb for something slightly harder. And so I was like consistently making that 20 minutes a little bit harder each session. And then going back to my pain measurement, like how bad did that feel? Am I able to handle the volume, or was it the intensity? And the big key here was that I wasn't increasing volume and intensity at the same time. I really had to only shift one thing at a time to make sure I knew exactly what was affecting me. So, I call this density training. A lot of my clients do density training. One, it's great for building capacity, but it's a great way to naturally progress what you're doing. So this was like a lot of my training in the beginning. And when I say training, I feel like I'm always training. I'm doing drills every time because I like to feel like I'm doing something, that I'm working towards something. If I'm just left to my own devices, and if I'm going to go project and open climb with people, I tend to climb too much or I climb too hard. So I like the structure, and this was a really simple structure to stick to over months. Then once I felt like, okay, I can crimp a little bit harder, I started doing pyramids. So it's, you do some easy climbs and then you slowly ramp up to harder climbs, and then you basically get to your limit that day. Your limit changes every day. And this was really important for me because like stress affects your body. And you've got your physical stress, you've got stress of owning a company, having a family, getting sick, all of these things, that's all stress. And so that will affect how you feel every day. And so this pyramid, allowing me to have flexibility at that top end, was really important, because some days my elbow would hurt more than other days. And so I would just go with it. If it was hurting a little bit more, I would keep the intensity much lower. And if it was feeling pretty good, I would try to push it. And I'm not saying like I jumped several grades in a session compared to maybe last session. Again, I tried to follow a very logical progression. All right. So like if I did V4 last week, I would make sure not to climb anything harder than V5 the following week. So the pyramids were great. I the first couple sessions, I ramped up the pyramids, um, where I was just going from the bottom to the top. And then I slowly started adding the other side of the pyramids. Once I hit my top climb, I would start climbing easier grades after that, and dropping back down to the bottom of the pyramid. And so this was also done maybe over a month. I experimented with the amount of climbs I was doing. And that was wonderful. It definitely increased my capacity and also helped me understand where my elbow was. And then, you know, basically starting in April of this year, I was able to start hanging off of the moonboard. And when I say hanging, I wasn't able to climb yet on the moonboard. It hurt. And my moonboard that I have in my garage is just over 40 degrees overhang. And so when you're at that angle, it is a lot of pressure on the elbow. So if my feet were on and I was at that 40-degree angle, it was almost immediate that I would feel it in my elbow. So what I did was just keep my feet on the ground, and I would move my hands around on the moonboard just to get familiar again with the moonboard. It had been over a year and a half that I had been on a moonboard. So I just wanted to get comfortable climbing on a moonboard again. So I did this for a couple weeks, and then slowly I started to do open climbing. So maybe I would do 2 moves at a time, come off, rest for, 30 seconds, do another couple moves. And none of these moves had to be a set climb. I just made it up. And then I brought up my playlist. So I have a moonboard playlist that is my go-to. Any time of year, I like to pull up this playlist and just see where am I at. So I pulled up this playlist that's mostly benchmark V4s and V5s. And of course, like, I just could not even do the easiest thing on there. And so I decided, okay, this is where I'm at. How am I going to adjust this so I can do something? So basically what I did was climb open feet on the moonboard, but keep the hand sequence the same, so that I could at least get some of the bigger moves that are on the moonboard, and as well as feel these handholds. Like, sometimes if I'm just open climbing, I will avoid certain handholds, but like, following a sequence with the hands kind of allows you some variability. After climbing these climbs with open feet, then I would slowly introduce the foot sequences. And so that basically from April through to, what are we in right now? July. So basically April through mid-June, I was doing a lot of this. And then at mid-June, I started to notice a huge change in my strength on the moonboard. I was able to climb benchmark V4s, not a lot of them. I could do, I think my first session I did 4, and I felt absolutely wrecked. I wasn't in pain. I felt my elbow a little bit, but my body was like, holy cow, moonboard is really hard. Yeah. So I would do a session that was kind of like half climb open and then half climb these strict V4 benchmarks. And then each session I would, again, just like slowly increase the amount of V4s I was doing. And I would moonboard once a week, maybe once every 10 days. I really had to give myself a lot of time between these moonboard sessions. If you have never climbed on a moonboard, it is very finger intensive, as well as, you're pulling a lot because it's 40 degrees. So now, basically the end of June, beginning of July, I'm able to climb benchmark V5s. And the last time I did a moonboard session, I was able to do about 5 to 6 benchmark V5s, and which is amazing. This is almost where I was back in May 2022. I was doing a lot of benchmark V5s and feeling about the same in terms of capacity. So I feel really good about that. Honestly, I didn't think I would ever get back to this point, but it's here, and it's awesome. The only thing that is very different is that my top end on the moonboard is not there. So I've been able to do a couple V8s on the moonboard. I don't even know if I could do a V6 right now, but granted, I have not tried. I still want to give myself that time to adapt to the moonboard. A couple months isn't really enough. I want to give myself at least, 5 to 6 months to adapt to the moonboard and start slowly introducing that higher intensity climbing, over the 6 months. So yeah, just know that right now I'm feeling really, really good with my climbing. I was able to do a V7 pretty quickly in Leavenworth, but on the other side of it, I went to Squamish and could barely do V4. And this is how climbing goes. It's sometimes you got it, sometimes you don't. And as long as you're having fun, that's really all that matters. So, a couple things that I wanted to share with you on the physical side that has really kept me going and kept me motivated was this ability to adapt on the moon board. So, anytime if you ever feel like you don't have a lot of options, I bet you do. I bet you do. I bet there's things that you can come up with to adapt your body to a certain activity. In reality, yes, there's a lot of things you probably can't do. But if you draw back the curtain and look a little deeper, there are a lot of things you can do. And being able to, like for myself, having that mindset flexibility for the moonboard, I think that was a really big turning point for me in my physicality as a climber in the last couple months. So I'm really grateful that I did it that way, and just continuing that journey. The other thing was like slow motion climbing. It's one of my favorite drills. Slow motion climbing has been basically the backbone of my rehab. Like it is how PTs want you to do regular exercises, isometrics, moving slowly, building awareness in your body. Slow motion climbing gives you that. It is really, I think, one of the best gifts that, that drills can give us, because it's increasing your body awareness. It increases your knowledge of how to move as a climber. And if you can show control in a move, that means you can start to add speed to it and more dynamic motion. It means you own that move. So slow motion climbing was a huge part of every single session when I went to the gym. And then lastly, of course, is consistency. Even during the darkest days, I tried to do something, whether that was walking. I had to move my body for at least 30 minutes. And, there were definitely times that I didn't get consistency in, and I would say I was more like 40% compliant. But my goal is 80% compliance every week. And that's about 6 sessions a week, or 6 days a week, between 5 and 6. And as long as my session was 30 minutes and my heart rate was above 110, I count it as a workout. And being able to get close to 80%, some weeks it would be 70%, some weeks it would be 100%. But majority of the time it was around 80. And when I look back at the last 4 months, if my overall score is around 80, I'm doing a good job. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm in the 78% ish, but I feel really good about that. And I think it's helped me so much. So yeah, that is it. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope that you got to know me a little bit better. I hope that my experience helps you at some point down the road, and just know that climbing is here for us no matter what. Even if you can't climb, the essence of climbing is always there. And I hope that it continues to bring you joy. And yeah, thanks so much, folks. And I'll see you in the next episode.